driving home from a Lakers game. An immigration lawyer by the name of Mac takes a wrong turn and he finds himself in a bad part of LA. He finds himself in a ghetto. As his car breaks down, then what happens is some guys start to surround him and start to create some trouble, and Mac immediately knows that he's in some trouble. So it opens the movie Grand Canyon. If you're in the morning after Easter, I actually referenced this particular scene in the message then. It's such a poignant scene in this movie. Because as Mac, played by Kevin Kline, finds himself surrounded by these men and he knows he's in all sorts of trouble, along comes Danny Glover. And Danny Glover plays a tow truck driver by the name of Mac. Mac's a little bit streetwise, he can see what's going on, and he tries to get the car and hook it up to his tow truck. But again, the five guys are causing trouble, and so he pauses for a moment. And he looks at the five guys that are causing trouble to Mac and that are trying to stir up dissent, that are trying to intimidate Mac with the potential of possibly still ripping him off. And Danny Glover says these words, "Man, the world ain't supposed to work like this. Maybe you don't know that, but this ain't the way it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to be able to do my job without asking you if I can, and that dude is supposed to be able to wait in his car without you ripping him off. Everything's supposed to be different from what it is here." You ever have moments like that when when you look at this world and you look at what we're going through and you look at the state of perhaps your experience or the world at large, and something in you says, this ain't the way it's supposed to be. A friend gets sick and you say, this ain't the way it's supposed to be. A good person dies young and you say, this ain't the way it's supposed to be. You live in a world where children get abused, where criminals get away with it, whatever it happens to be. Youth get shot at schools. People go hungry while others drown in plenty. And you look at all this and you say, this ain't the way it's supposed to be. And in the story we're looking at tonight, it's found in John chapter 11. Jesus lets someone that he loves die. And there's part of us saying, is that the way it's supposed to be? Maybe that it ain't supposed to be that way. It's an unexpected story, and it doesn't go the way that we expect it to go. Let me just read the start of the story. It's found in John chapter 11. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And so what happens is Jesus gets a message that, hey, Lazarus, your friend, the one that you love, is sick. And it's important. It's interesting because these people that send this message, the people that are sending the message about Mary and Martha and Lazarus, his family, they're not just sort of people that Jesus sort of met, or they're not just acquaintances. If they were on Facebook today, they wouldn't be acquaintances, they wouldn't even be friends. They'd be that sort of close friend, almost family sort of category. Jesus knows them. He's stayed at their house. He's had meals with them. There's a close, intimate connection. We're told that Jesus loved them. In verse 5, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And so these people actually come to Jesus, and not as Jesus the teacher, not as Jesus as the healer, but Jesus, you're my friend. And the one that you know, the one that you love, is actually dying. And so how should he respond when he hears that Lazarus is sick? How would you respond? If somebody like that, that's really close to you, and you get word that they're sick or they're ill or they're in trouble, what would you do? I would go. If I'm in a meeting, I'll leave the meeting. I'm in a conversation, I'll stop mid-sentence. I would go. I would drop everything. If somebody that I cared about was in trouble, I would be there in a heartbeat. Nothing would stop me. And so what does Jesus do? What he does is surprising. It's unexpected. If you know the story, you know where it's going to go. But if you don't know the story, you say, I didn't think Jesus would do that. Because in verse 6 we're told, So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. He heard what was going on. He knew what was going on, and he stayed. He heard and he knew what was going on, and he kept doing what he was doing. He heard what was going on for his friend. He knew what was going on for his friend, and he didn't drop everything to be with him. He just simply stayed where he was. How does that work? He loves them. He hears that Lazarus is sick, and he stays. And he stays 2 more days while Lazarus is back in Bethany, where he dies. And Jesus knows this. And he knows that delaying 2 days will cause the death or create the context or the time for his friend to die. And so he has a conversation with his disciples about what's going on. They're confused about what's going on. And he turns to them, and we're told this in verses 11 and 12. We're told after he said this, he went on to tell them, his disciples, he says, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better." Now, Jesus isn't actually talking about him really being asleep. The disciples don't get it. Jesus is saying, no, he's actually dead. That's what he's trying to... He knows that they're dead. He's trying to soften it. We'd say, oh, somebody's sleeping or they've passed away. We try to soften it. Jesus said, he's asleep, but I'm going to wake him up. And the disciples are thinking, oh, cool. He's really asleep. We didn't have to worry about going to Bethany. They didn't want to go to Bethany. They didn't want to go to Jerusalem. They knew that if they went to Jerusalem, there's all sorts of hostility against Jesus at this time. And they knew that, hey, Jesus, if you go to Jerusalem, there are people there that want to kill you. We don't really want to go to Bethany. We don't want to go in that sort of vicinity. We don't want to go in that region. Hey, if he was just sick and he was sort of fell asleep and he's going to be okay, great. We don't need to go. But the shocking thing is, Jesus is not really talking about him being asleep. He knows that he's dead. And so he makes this really clear to his disciples. We're told in verses 13 to 15, Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. It seems to the moment that Jesus hears about Lazarus, he knows what he's going to do. He knows how this is going to end. And he knows what he wants to do in this situation. He says, Lazarus is dead. He's not asleep. He's dead, and I'm going to raise him up. That's what's going on. And Jesus knew that this whole story was not going to end in ultimate death for Lazarus. He knew that he was going to glorify. He was going to be glorified. His Father was going to be glorified through this. And so when Jesus delay, and it seems like Jesus hears this, and he's not acting in a way that we would expect him to act, and it's all sort of confusing. But Jesus has got a plan. He's got something in mind, and they're all trying to figure out what it out. And nobody's thinking this way. Nobody's understanding what is he doing and why is he doing this. And when Jesus gets to Bethany, he encounters Martha, and then he encounters Mary, and they're grieving. And all they know is they sent message to Jesus 4 days ago. And in that 4 days' time, their brother Lazarus has died, and now Jesus has turned up. And so they come to Jesus first. He encounters Martha. And Martha comes to him and says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Hear what she says? If you'd just come when we asked, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't be feeling this grief. He wouldn't be dead. And they have this sort of strange conversation about the resurrection, and Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And she's sort of trying to figure out what he's talking about there, and then they go and he says, well, where's Mary? And they go and find Mary, Martha's sister, the other sister of Lazarus. Interesting thing is she says the same thing as Martha. When Jesus gets to Mary, this is what happens, verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Hear what they're saying? It's like, Jesus, we know you can make the blind see and the lame walk and the leper cleansed. We know you can make the mute speak, the deaf hear. We know you can walk on water and feed 5,000 and calm storms. We know you can do all those sorts of things. But death is just the way things are in this world, and I'm not sure if you can do something about that. That's a reality of this broken world, and death has the final say. And death cannot be arrested, it cannot not be defeated, it cannot be overturned. And had you been here, you could have prevented this from happening. But now, in a sense, what they're saying, it seems like it's all too late. And so Mary and Jesus and Martha, then they make their way to the tomb of this one that Jesus loved. And when they get to the tomb, something really unexpected happens. It's recorded in the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus gets to this tomb, we're told in verse 35, and we're told, Jesus wept. He loses it. And it begs the question, why? Why would he weep? I mean, he knew how this was going to end. He knew he had a plan. If he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, why weep? Why should it bother him? It's like, why would you get upset if he knows that this is going to end in a really positive thing? Why would he be weeping about that? And then, if he wasn't going to raise him from the dead, Jesus actually also knew that going back to Jerusalem, in a week's time, he would be dead himself. He knew what lay ahead for him. And so, hey, well, when I die, I'll be with Lazarus anyway, so why would he worry about it? We weren't going to do much in the next week anyway. They probably weren't going to hang out much over the next week. I mean, Jesus' schedule was fairly full in that last week. And so what makes Jesus weep? See, knowing all this, knowing how this is going to end, knowing where this story is going, knowing that he wants to resurrect Lazarus, and in fact, he's going to resurrect Lazarus, why does he weep? And when the Jews saw him weeping, they said, oh, look at this. See how he loved him. Because they're trying to make sense of it. When you look at this, what is Jesus weeping about? In a sense, he sort of created this situation. And the Jews looking at it, as they see Jesus come by the graveside, there's all sorts of people weeping and wailing. And Jesus, in a sense, joins the chorus and they go, oh, see how he loved him. And we can read this story and go, oh yeah, that's why he's weeping. Clearly Jesus loved Lazarus. And no doubt he did love Lazarus. In fact, a couple of times in this passage we're told that he loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. That's not why he's weeping though. Why bother crying if he knows it's going to be okay? And could it be the problem, the pain, the source of weeping for Jesus was not the death of Lazarus? But could it be there was something else going on? And so when he gets to the tomb, we're told this is what happens. Just before he weeps, we're told that when Jesus saw her weeping, this is Mary, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. That little phrase, deeply moved and troubled, it's a Greek word, it's embrimame. And when that word is used in different places, sometimes it's not just he was troubled or sad. It's like he's angry. He's outraged. He's disturbed. There's an emotional indignation about how could this happen? And when Jesus comes and he's feeling this, it's not just that he's sad, it's not that he's grieving, it's not just he's in pain. He's looking at what's going on and there's something here that he's saying, this is really, really getting me angry. This is really disturbing me. There's something here that is stirring something in my gut. What is it? What is it there that's making Jesus so angry, that's making him so mad? As I mentioned before, it wasn't that Lazarus was dead because he knew he was going to do something about that. And so why is he so deeply moved? What is it that frustrates him? What is it that angers him? I reckon he looks around and what angers him and what frustrates him is not particularly the death of Lazarus, although I'm sure that it does. It's the fact that this thing happens the time. That we live in a world where there is so much pain and injustice, and where there's sin and suffering and death. And I think he wants to, in a sense, channel Danny Glover and say, this ain't the way it's supposed to be. He looks and says, this is not the world that I wanted. This is not the way it was supposed to be. My friends aren't meant to be broken and destroyed over the death of their brother, and I shouldn't be grieving outside his tomb. That is not the way this world is supposed to be. And at times we want to blame God when we feel that indignation, that anger, that frustration at the reality of the world. Because the Jews looking at what's going on, some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? See, sometimes in the midst of evil, chaos and suffering, we want to say, couldn't God have done something? Couldn't God have done something about this? And when there's despair at a funeral and where there's no hope of resurrection, there's often that case that we think, why doesn't God do something about this? And yet when Jesus came to Mary and Martha, he kept asking them the same question. He particularly asked Martha this when he first encountered her. He talks to her about resurrection. And he says, hey, in all your pain and all your grief and all your sorrow, I want you to know that I am the resurrection and the life. And he keeps saying to her, do you believe? Do you believe in me? Do you believe I'm the resurrection and the life? In other words, do you believe that I can offer you hope when you look at this world and you say it ain't supposed to be this way? When you find yourself in pain and wondering as if this is all there is? Do you believe I can offer you an answer, a hope, a solution, an alternative to what you're experiencing now, where you understand that this isn't all there is? Do you understand that I am the resurrection and the life? And I think that's a great question for Martha. And I think it's a great question for all of us. It's the very reason he delayed his coming. The very reason he waited for Lazarus to die was because the family he loved, he wanted them to experience a greater sense of faith than they'd ever had before, to know a reality they could never have known had he not intervened in the most horrendous of moments for them. Because they believed he was the Messiah, they believed he was the one. They believed all that sort of stuff already. But he wanted them to know that, hey, I am the resurrection and I am the life. I'm the one in whom there is life. I'm the one that gives you a future and a hope when you get overwhelmed by the reality of the world that produces moments like this. And so, together, Jesus and Mary and Martha, and they walk up to the tomb of Lazarus. And we're told, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, and he's been there for 4 days. Right? So that word again, deeply moved, is embrimame. Right? Again, Jesus is feeling his emotions as he walks to a tomb and he's saying, this frustrates me, this sort of, that this is the world that we live in, where these sorts of things happen. And he says, take away the stone. And what does Martha do? Martha's really, really practical. She says, it's going to stink. He's been in there for a few days. I mean, he probably stunk before. He's a boy, right? He stunk before, but now he really, really stinks. I love in the King James. The King James version isn't quite so polite. It doesn't say there was an odor. She says there's a stench, right? It's going to be really, really bad. And he's been there for 4 days. In other words, what's the point, Jesus? He's actually dead. Like he's really dead. There's rabbinic writing at the time, so there's Jewish thought. It's not in the Bible, it's Jewish thought at the time that when somebody died, they would have this belief, this conviction that the body or the soul would hover around the body for about 3 days. And then it would depart from the body. Because after about 4 days, like it was starting to decay, it was nasty. And so when you get to 4 days, it's really interesting. Jesus delayed 2 days so that Lazarus was dead for 4 days by the time he got there. And so when any Jew reading this story or knowing that he's been dead for 4 days, they go, oh, we get it. He's like really, really dead. He's not like mostly dead. Like, he's dead. It's not like he's just having a really bad day. Right? There's just no doubt about it in anybody's mind. They're saying like he is gone, he's passed away, he's kicked the bucket, he's breathed his last, he's pushing up daisies, he's done his last dance. Whatever phrase they want to put around it, they're basically saying he's like dead. He is really, really dead, this guy. And at that point, when they get to the tomb, this is when Jesus makes it abundantly clear, in case they haven't got it, why he waited. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And they removed the stone, and he prays, and Lazarus is raised. He says, Lazarus, come out. Early church writer, a guy by the name of Augustine, he reckons he had to say Lazarus, come out, because if he didn't say Lazarus, it would have been a whole bunch of dead bodies coming up here. He said, come out, raise up. Right? And he says, Lazarus, come up. And Lazarus is like, well, that's me, right? And he gets up and he comes out. And it's a climactic sign in the Gospel of John. It's to draw our attention to a particular reality. That Jesus is the one who conquers death. He is the resurrection and he is the life. That's why he stayed for 2 days. He knew about Lazarus. He heard about Lazarus. He knew about Lazarus. He stayed so that they would have this moment. So their perspective of him would be enlarged, so their faith would grow. And to those friends who have lost hope, to those who felt beat down by the reality of this world, to those who thought that death has the final say, to those who have this feeling that this ain't the way it's supposed to be, Jesus' final word is, this ain't the way it's going to be. I am the resurrection and life. To Mary, to Martha, to you, to me, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And he goes, I'm not just telling you this. I'm showing you this. And so whenever you get to the point and your car breaks down in the proverbial ghetto and you feel a little scared and you're wondering what's going on, and there's something you looking at this world with all its brokenness and all its pain and all its death and all its suffering, you're wondering, where is God in this? Will God not do something about this? This ain't the way it's supposed to be. Then we come back to this moment where Jesus says, that's right, this ain't the way it's supposed to be. And this ain't the way it's going to stay. Because I am the resurrection and I am the life. And this ain't the end of the story. And that should sustain us and give us hope and strength to endure. That we're never that the pain and the suffering and the injustice and the grief is not all there is. But Jesus says, I give you a hope and I give you a future if you just believe in me, if you just trust me. And I hope you will. And I hope you do. Because it doesn't have to be this way. Let me pray. Father, as we go back to a world, and sometimes we wonder about the world that we go back into, in a sense, the world that we live in. We know that when we experience pain and injustice and we feel grief and concern and frustration and anger about the way things are, that you remind us that you feel all those things, that you weep at it, that you get frustrated at it, you get angry at it, and yet you don't leave us without a hope and without a future. That in this very poignant moment, you chose to hear and to know, but to stay so that we would see that you don't just talk about being the resurrection and the life. You don't just offer us hope beyond this reality. But you actually showed us that you could arrest death, that you could conquer death. That there is a future and there is a hope. So, Father, we thank you for that. Father, my prayer for everyone here was that truth would be sustain them, Father. If anybody here doesn't know the reality of that Father, would have opportunities just to talk and to explore this together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.